Greetings from the underworld. This is your host, Carl Cactus Warmith, and you're listening to Thinker Stinker, where guests bring one film that makes them think and one they say stinks. Today, we got some jazz for you. The Thinker is the 1988 Thelonious Monk documentary Straight No Chaser, directed by Charlotte Zwerin. Monk was an uncompromisingly unique jazz pianist characterized by his often cacophonous approach, eccentric mannerisms, and cool-ass hats. The film is largely comprised of archival, behind-the-scenes footage of Monk from the late 60s. The Stinker is Damien Chazelle's 2014 film Whiplash, which stars J.K. Simmons as a sadistic jazz instructor. His group's new drummer, Andrew, played by Miles Teller, must endure his wrath in hopes of succeeding at the fictional music school Schaefer Conservatory. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy.
I would like to introduce Berkeley bassist extraordinaire, Jack Davies.
My man, how's it going?
I'm chilling, man. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
So your Thinker was Thelonious Monk, Straight No Chaser.
Honestly, phenomenal documentary. It's almost exclusively footage of him from back in the day of Thelonious Monk, and it just captures the character of the man himself so perfectly. It's crucial. It's a crucial watch if you're a fan of jazz music or any music in general, frankly.
Yeah, it's a really intimate doc because you're right there with him as he's pacing, spinning around, and then just assaulting the piano. And it spares you of the over-reliance on talking heads that so many retrospective jazz docs have.
Yeah, I totally agree on your point of other jazz documentaries. I recently watched also, it's called Chasing the Train. It was on Netflix about John Coltrane. And I mean, I didn't dislike it necessarily, but some of the features are just so unrelated. Like Bill Clinton was in that documentary. I was like, what is this? I mean, I guess he plays the saxophone, so it's sort of related, but it doesn't do anything to show you John Coltrane as a character or as a figure in 20th century music, but Straight No Chaser, on the other hand, you see the eccentricity and the idiosyncrasies of the man, as well as like it features so much of his music. If you knew nothing about the man, like this is definitely the place that you would want to start.
It's interesting that you bring up that train doc because I'm familiar with it. I think it's a good example of what a lot of jazz docs are like now, where you just kind of string together what you can. And then usually there's a scope that's too ambitious for the film. So how can you cover John Coltrane in, 80, 90 minutes? You can't. And so this documentary, it does a vague trying to tell you, where he was from and how he died. But it's really just about being in a room with him for most of the movie, which is why it's so magnetizing. When you're in the studio and he's getting pissed off because there's a lot of miscommunication and they don't know if they're recording or not, and he doesn't want to rehearse. And he's like, no, we do 1 or 2 takes. That's fucking it. And I love them talking to his side men and them just like coming to terms with the fact that if they screw up on the recording, oh well, they'll have to hear it forever.
It's there forever. Yeah, exactly. It's well done because I think he speaks for himself, like even when he's not saying any words, he's literally just spinning around on the stage. It's so excellent that they have all this footage because they can do that. But I love that scene. He's walking down the street and there's a bunch of people across the street, the other side of the street, and they're yelling out to him, Monk, how's it going, man? It's a portal into the past.
Like he has a world and a language that completely makes sense. That guy could play piano like nobody else did. Nobody else played the same way as him. I was trying to think of another jazz pianist who I would even compare to him. And I guess just in terms of dissonance, there's Cecil Taylor, but in terms of style and voice, there's no one.
Yeah, and the thing with Monk too is, in my opinion at least, like while it is dissonant, akin to a Cecil Taylor, say, or your Andrew Hills and stuff, it has a playful quality that no one else can replicate unless they are specifically doing a Monk impression. It's playful and it's joyous and happy, but still dark and complicated at the same time. It's just such a miracle that there is all of this footage of him just being a dude bopping around on the street, because he communicates that exact thing just in his speaking voice. Even it's he's quiet and he's sensitive clearly, but he's still funny as hell, and to me that is like the essence of his compositions.
What are your favorite Monk recordings?
There's this one cut of this tune We See from I I think the record is also called Straight No Chaser. There's a couple live cuts of Boo Boo's Birthday. This is a tune, Ugly Beauty. That's a fun one because that's his only tune that he ever wrote in 3/4 time signature. He has such a strong vocabulary and language that it all sounds like him. Whereas a Headhunters recording by Herbie Hancock, you might not know that it's the same person as something off of Maiden Voyage, for instance. But when you hear Monk, you know it's Monk right away.
You're right. It's super identifiable, which is not the case for all jazz pianists. I mean, there's certain ones that like stick out and you can say, all right, this is Bill Evans, which by the way, Bill Evans is always the jazz pianist that in my experience, when I'm talking to piano players, they like Bill Evans the most.
Yes, I've noticed that as well. And I totally understand why, because it's such difficult material that it is stimulating for a pianist even, and it's the synthesis of like the Bud Powell style of bebop. It swings really hard, but his harmony is so impressionistic that it leaves the bebop tradition. I think Monk is similar to that, but just in a completely different aesthetic way. Your attention stays on it the entire time. Whereas I love Bill Evans. He's definitely one of my top 3 favorite pianists, but you have to try hard to pay attention the entire time, especially on some of those longer cuts. You have to actively engage with it. But with Monk, even if you are sitting back and letting it come at you, you're enthralled the entire time.
So what are those top 3 pianists?
Well, firstly, I would put Bill Evans in my top 3 for sure. Trio work is just unbelievable. I'm a bass player myself. He always had the most cutting edge bass players like Scott LaFaro or Eddie Gomez. I would put Chick Corea in that list as well. I would say like Now He Sings, Now He Sobs, that record. Same thing, always has excellent sidemen. I would put Herbie Hancock in that list too. Sure. It's kind of a normie top 3. Like those guys are very well known, but they're so undeniably excellent that I would have to put them there. Monk would definitely make the top 5, but I'd sort of view him more as a composer. I would also add honorable mention McCoy Tyner, man himself.
Yeah, I love McCoy on all the Coltrane records more than I like him as a band leader, because he complements Train so well. It's really, really hard to be a guy in John Coltrane's band when McCoy Tyner was in it.
McCoy Tyner generates such a rhythmic intensity, even when he is in a band with Elvin Jones. He's probably such a loud drummer. I mean, I never saw him live, obviously, but from those records, he sounds so ferocious and loud and fiery. But McCoy Tyner stands out as much as John Coltrane or Elvin Jones. And of course, there's Jimmy Garrison tying it all together. But
yeah, he's the best guy in that band, right?
Exactly.
So I was trying to hammer out my own top 10 pianists list. Jazz pianists specifically. I kind of like threw in the towel because I didn't want to, I was physically incapable of picking favorites.
Because you don't want to exclude people that you love.
You don't want to exclude people that you love, but also I didn't feel like many of these guys were better than the rest. And by these guys, I should include Mary Lou Williams, who is brilliant also. But aside from that, it's men on my list. All right, so I got Duke, of course. I got Monk. I got Bud Powell. I really love Bud Powell's later Blue Note recordings. He's got an album called The Scene Changes that it's totally him transforming himself into a hard bop sound, which is really interesting coming from a guy that was so bebop. All right, I got Herbie also, of course. Empyrean Isles is the one that I like the most. It's probably because I'm obsessed with Freddie Hubbard.
Sounds so good on One Finger Snap. That's my favorite tune on that record.
It's all great, the whole record. Sun Ra, Horace Silver. Horace Silver doesn't
underappreciated. Yeah.
Also, if we're talking about stage presence, like Monk totally has it because of the way he kind of looms over the piano and he's really he hammers those notes. He's a spectacle. But Horace Silver with his almost like rock and roll hair, like a mad scientist, and also just great tunes as well. And then of course, Oscar Peterson has to make that list.
Canadian.
Yeah. Probably the best jazz Canadian that I can think of aside
Absolutely.
from No, you're not quite Oscar Peterson level.
Not there yet, man. Not there yet. Give me about 200 years and
yeah. Listen, Oscar Peterson, He's not from this planet. What other jazz documentaries rank highly for you?
The Charlie Hayden documentary I think it's called Ramblin' Boy. It's pretty excellent, I must say. That one specifically talks a lot about Ornette Coleman and how they met and the music that they created together. Rasan Rolenkirk one was excellent. We talked about that one
Yeah,
before.
the case of the three-sided dream.
Yes, I love the animations in that too. It's very masterful.
The story is so intoxicating. His performance, everything about that dude. To any listeners, if you don't know Roland Kirk, go look him up. Look him up on YouTube and see him doing his thing. I've compiled a bit of a list of the jazz documentaries that I think are the best. I called him Morgan, especially fantastic because it has all these recordings of his wife who ended up killing him. Let's Get Lost, the Chet Baker documentary, is more similar to this Monk one than the Morgan one is because it's another cat where you really don't feel like you have a good grasp on who they are after the documentary. I mean, one of the best parts about Straight No Chaser is you leave with an intense curiosity about Monk and what was he really up to? You know, if he was up for 4 days and pacing in his apartment, what was his stream of consciousness like? Keep on keeping on. The documentary, yeah.
Justin Coughlin and Clark Terry, I think, right?
Yes. If there's a jazz documentary that will make you cry, if you're a jazz fan or not, it's that one. All right. So your stinker was Whiplash.
That's right. When I first saw it, I actually really liked it. I've seen it many times. I like the film, actually, when I watch it just as a movie. But I would like to consider myself a jazz musician. I have to put it as the stinker category because a lot of people have seen that movie and it's like very misrepresentative of how I think 99.999% of jazz musicians would actually operate. It's a sports film, really. It's like hits all the same beats as like a football or a boxing movie or something. It's like the level of aggression in that film are like 50 times more in this like 2 hours than I've ever even witnessed after 4 semesters at Berkeley. Like,
you go to an elite music school. So how does it pair up with your experience?
So firstly, there would never ever be like in this ensemble that Andrew Naiman, played by Miles Teller, joins. There are like second and third string drummers. It would never happen. It just wouldn't. People would have definitely told Fletcher, the professor, to fuck off like 10 years before this film even happened. And this point has been brought up before in some YouTube videos. One glaring thing is like drummers in this day and age don't really like Buddy Rich. But like he's the central focus of the movie, like has posters of Buddy Rich in his room.
I'm not a drummer, but it does also strike me as weird. Like if you're going to list the greatest jazz drummers, like his name wouldn't be the first off my tongue, I can tell you that. Like Max Roach, sure. Art Blakey, sure. But like Buddy Rich, like I guess, I don't know.
And like I have no diss to that man's music, but it's just they are clearly taking this medium and trying to present it so that normal people would understand it. Like people know who Buddy Rich is. Like he was kind of a pop figure, really, and as far as jazz musicians go. As a movie, if I were to just watch Whiplash again, I wouldn't. It doesn't make me angry. I don't think it's a terrible piece of cinema, but you know there are some other issues too. Like I think Miles Teller's a little bit miscast. He's a bit preppy for that kind of character, you know.
Not right for it at all. No. As a monster movie, I think it's very effective.
Yes, exactly.
Like a kind of pseudo horror movie. J.K. Simmons is the featured creature. Okay. If that's how it was presented and that's how it was celebrated, then I would have absolutely no problem with Whiplash. Whiplash is inarguably entertaining. You don't look away from it. It's never boring. As far as authenticity goes, and again, you are more qualified to talk about this going to music school, but just as a jazz fan in general and a fan of good storytelling, quite a few qualms. Yeah, I mean, okay, I was in jazz band in middle school, right? I had a rageaholic teacher. So there was already like some predisposition to me liking this movie. But there's something kind of grotesque about the way that J.K. Simmons' character, Fletcher, is scripted and the specific kind of bullying that he does to his kids that makes me think it's a little bit for people to feel vicariously bullied or to vicariously bully. And it raises an eyebrow for me. I'm not saying that you can't depict characters like that, but I think there's such an emphasis on him tearing people apart. And those are like the moments of dialogue people are probably going to remember after having seen Whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something disconcerting about that.
It's a bit of a cheap payoff to have that because obviously people are going to react a certain way to it. The film is trying to make you uncomfortable. Like, I think there are smarter ways to do that.
All right. So as far as storytelling goes, the girlfriend thing is so secondary, so half-assed, that I just don't believe it. I don't buy it for a second. Oh, look, guys, he's prioritized his music over this girlfriend character that we didn't develop at all and so has no fucking weight. I do quite like when he goes to see Fletcher perform. I don't like the colossal drum solo. That's where it's totally a sports movie. And you're right. It's like, okay, it's someone honing their skills for the entire film, and it's going to culminate in some fucking ridiculous, like, I'm playing drums for 5 minutes straight scene that
it's embarrassing a little bit. You know, if you look at it from like the musician angle, like he's playing at, I guess he's at Lincoln Center or something, right, for that final. I don't think that would actually impress anybody, especially after he fucked up that last tune that they had played so hard. Like, I think that's probably the worst thing that you could do, draw even more attention to yourself like for that long. It's just, it doesn't really work. It's a sports movie thing. Like he scored 15 touchdowns. I find it interesting that like the titular song Whiplash, like that is pretty obscure. Like it's a Don Ellis thing. It's like a 70s fusion. It's a hip recording. If they're like trying to make it accessible, they should have done a Duke Ellington or something like that. I don't know.
All right. It don't mean a thing. Take 5.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, I think about Soul, the Pixar movie that just came out. It's kind of doing the same thing. It's capitalizing off of jazz music that never got the recognition it deserved, especially among Black artists. And there's something wrong with that.
Are there any parts of it that you did especially like that? Are there any bits that stood out to you?
Yeah, sure. When he's saying "not my tempo" and throwing a music stand, Jesus, I feel like I'm in middle school. It was never that bad, for the record.
I think every musician's had a few scenarios. Like I've certainly had classes where like the tension in the room is just so palpable because the teacher's ripping on some kid. The one scene that I actually do quite like is the dinner table scene where his uncle and his cousins come over, and it's silly. Like it's an over the top like argument. He could have so easily just kept his mouth shut, but when he's ripping on his cousins, he's like, "Oh, it's only Division III football." I did really enjoy that scene because if you're a musician, you're used to like other people, their accomplishments having more like social worth than yours, and you just want to be like, man, fuck off. it was satisfying.
Trust me, it's okay to say on my podcast, fuck sports.
Okay, good.
It's allowed. You won't be censored. No. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not even just restricted to music. It's just the arts and humanities in general. Like, why the fuck do we care about sports so much in our society? Is business or, you know, chemistry the only things that you can major in this world? Yeah, maybe not all of us want to be rich. Maybe some of us just want to play bass.
That's literally my entire mode of being. I could be homeless as long as I have my trusty Fender Jazz bass.
Well, on that note, I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, man. I had a blast.
I had a blast too, brother.
And there you have it, folks. Listen, how are we going to resist turning this straight no chaser conversation into a broader one about jazz? Let me tell you, folks, jazz cuts deep. It's all about putting yourself out there, personal expression, freedom. None of that Ed Sheeran, Shawn Mendes whining shit. I hear echidnas wobbling up to my doorstep, so I gotta get out of here. Peace out.